The morning sun rose over the colony world of Vareth Prime, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson as hundreds of young people gathered in the great arena for the most important day of their lives. The day of the bonding ceremony, when dragons would descend from the mountains to choose their human partners forever. Danny Mercer stood among the crowd of hopeful 16-year-olds, his heart beating so hard he thought it might burst through his chest, and his palms were slick with nervous sweat as he watched the distant peaks, where the dragons made their homes for 300 years. Ever since humanity had first arrived on this world and formed an alliance with the ancient Draconis species, this ceremony had determined everything about a person's future, their status, their career, their entire place in society. Those who were chosen by dragons became riders, the elite protectors and leaders of the colony, while those who were not chosen were sent to work in the mines and factories. Living ordinary lives without glory or purpose, Danny had spent his entire childhood preparing for this moment, studying dragon lore until his eyes ached, practicing the meditation techniques that were supposed to make his soul more visible to the great beasts, and dreaming every single night of the dragon that would one day call him partner. His father Marcus was a dragon rider, bonded to a powerful bronze dragon named Tempest, and his mother Lisa had always told Danny that he had the soul of a rider, that she could see it shining in his eyes. Even his younger sister Brooke, only 12 years old, had looked up at him this morning and said she knew he would be chosen by the greatest dragon of them all. Standing beside Danny in the arena was his childhood friend Katie Dawson, a girl with bright red hair and freckles who had grown up next door to him. And the two of them had made a promise when they were just 7 years old that they would become riders together and fly side by side through the clouds. "Are you nervous?" Katie whispered, her green eyes scanning the mountain peaks for any sign of movement. Danny nodded but did not trust his voice to speak without shaking. The arena was circular and massive, carved from white stone that gleamed in the sunlight, with tall pillars around the edge that were decorated with carvings of dragons and humans in flight. And in the center was a raised platform where the unbonded young people stood waiting for their fates to be decided around the outer ring. Thousands of colonists had gathered to watch, including families hoping to see their children chosen, and Danny spotted his parents in the crowd, his father standing tall and proud in his rider uniform while his mother clutched her hands together in prayer. Horns sounded across the valley, deep and resonant, and everyone in the arena fell silent as the first dragons appeared on the horizon. They came like living storms, dozens of them at first, then hundreds, their scales catching the light in every color imaginable. As they descended toward the arena with wings that blocked out the sun, Danny felt his breath catch in his throat at the beauty of it. These magnificent creatures that had ruled this world long before humanity arrived, now circling overhead and searching for the souls that called to them. The first dragon to land was a massive silver beast with eyes like liquid mercury, and it walked slowly through the crowd of young people, its head swaying back and forth as it searched for its chosen partner. When it stopped in front of Katie, Danny felt his heart clench with a mixture of joy and fear. Katie gasped as the silver dragon lowered its great head and pressed its snout against her forehead, and a soft glow surrounded them both as the bond was formed, a connection of souls that would last until death. "Zephyros," Katie breathed, somehow knowing the dragon's name without being told, and tears of happiness streamed down her face as she turned to look at Danny with an expression that was both ecstatic and apologetic. Danny tried to smile for her, tried to be happy for his friend, but all he could think about was the cold fear spreading through his stomach. More dragons landed, and more young people were chosen, the bonds forming in flashes of light that made the crowd cheer and weep with joy. Danny watched as even Cole Hartwell, the boy who had bullied him throughout their academy years, was claimed by a fierce red dragon with scales like burning coals. And Cole's smug expression as he turned to sneer at Danny made something twist painfully in his chest. Hours passed, and the sun moved across the sky. And one by one the other young people were led away by their dragon partners until the platform began to empty. Danny remained standing, his eyes fixed on the mountains, waiting for the dragon that would surely come for him any moment now. But the dragons kept passing him by, walking around him as if he were invisible, as if he were not even there. And with each one that ignored him, Danny felt another piece of his hope crumble away. The shadows grew long and the air grew cold. And finally, the last dragon departed with its chosen human. And Danny stood alone on the platform in the fading light of day. He could not move, could not breathe, could not understand what had happened. A murmur rippled through the crowd, shocked whispers that grew louder and louder until they became a roar in Danny's ears. "Unchosen," someone said, and the words spread like poison through the arena. He was unchosen. How is that possible? In 300 years, only a handful have ever been passed over. Danny's legs gave out and he sank to his knees on the cold stone, his vision blurring with tears. He refused to let fall. They called people like him the Hollow Ones, humans whose souls were supposedly too empty or too broken or too weak to resonate with dragonkind. People who were considered cursed and worthless and better off forgotten. His father appeared beside him, but Marcus could not meet Danny's eyes, and his mother was sobbing into her hands. And his sister Brooke was being held back by relatives who did not want her to approach her hollow brother. "I am sorry," Danny whispered to no one in particular, though he did not understand what he had done wrong. What was broken inside him that made him so unworthy of love that night? After the pitying looks and the awkward silences and the way people stepped aside to avoid touching him, Danny escaped to the cliffs overlooking the Dragon Mountains, where he sat alone in the darkness and stared at the stars and wondered if there was any point in continuing to exist. That was when he saw something glinting in the moonlight far below, half buried in the sand near the rocks, and without really knowing why, Danny climbed down the treacherous cliff face to see what it was. His fingers closed around an old necklace with a strange black gemstone that seemed to swallow the light around it. And the moment he touched it, something stirred deep in his chest. Something that had been sleeping his entire life. Something that felt like fire and shadow and the beating of enormous wings. Danny did not understand what he had found or what it meant. But for the first time since the ceremony ended, he felt something other than despair. He felt possibility. 3 weeks had passed since the bonding ceremony, and Danny's life had become something unrecognizable. Something small and gray and filled with the constant weight of shame that pressed down on his shoulders every single day. He had been removed from the Rider Academy, where he had spent his entire childhood training, and now he wore the dull brown uniform of the Labor Division, assigned to work in the deep mines beneath the colony where sunlight never reached and hope seemed like a distant memory. His former classmates flew overhead on their dragons, their laughter echoing across the sky, and Danny kept his head down and pretended not to hear them, pretended not to feel the sting of their pity or their contempt. Katie had tried to visit him once, writing down on Zephyros with an expression of guilt and sorrow, but Danny had turned away before she could speak, unable to bear the kindness in her eyes when he knew she could never truly understand what it felt like to be hollow. The necklace he had found on the cliffs remained hidden beneath his shirt, pressed against his skin where no one could see it. And though Danny did not understand why he kept it, something inside him refused to let it go. It was warm against his chest, warmer than it should have been. And sometimes at night, when he lay in his small bunk in the workers' dormitory, he could swear he felt it pulse like a second heartbeat. The first whisper came on a Tuesday, during a routine maintenance shift in the deepest section of the mines where Danny had been sent to check the atmospheric readings. He was alone in the darkness, his helmet light the only source of illumination, when he heard a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You are not hollow," the voice said. "Deep and ancient and filled with something that might have been sadness or might have been fury. They simply cannot see what you carry." Danny spun around, his heart hammering, his light sweeping across the rocky walls. But there was no one there, nothing but shadows and stone and the endless silence of the underground. His hand went instinctively to the necklace beneath his shirt, and the moment his fingers touched it, he felt a warmth spread through his entire body like fire flowing through his veins. "Who are you?" Danny whispered into the darkness, his voice trembling. "I am what they feared," the voice replied. "I am what they sealed away. I am what has waited centuries for someone like you." Over the following days, Danny began to have conversations with the voice, always in private, always in the dark places where no one else could hear. And slowly he learned the truth about what he had found. The voice called itself Obsidian, and it claimed to be the last of the elder dragons. Beings of such immense power that the dragons of today were merely their distant and diluted descendants. Pale shadows of what dragonkind had once been. Thousands of years ago, Obsidian explained, the elder dragons had ruled not just one world but entire galaxies. Their power drawn from the very fabric of reality itself. And they had been so mighty that even the stars trembled when they flew. But power brings fear. And fear brings betrayal, and eventually the other elder dragons had turned against Obsidian. Not because it had done anything wrong, simply because its strength was so vast that they could not control it. They had sealed Obsidian's essence within the black gemstone, trapping it for eternity, and then they had hidden themselves away and faded from the universe, leaving only their weaker descendants to carry on the legacy of dragonkind. "The bonding ceremony your people hold so sacred," Obsidian said one night as Danny sat alone in an abandoned mine shaft. "It was never designed to find worthy humans. It was designed to filter out the dangerous ones." Danny felt his breath catch in his throat, not understanding what the dragon meant. "There are two kinds of souls in your species," Obsidian continued. "Most humans have their true power locked away, sleeping, dormant, harmless, and these are the ones the ordinary dragons can safely bond with. And the others?" Danny asked. "The others are like you," Obsidian said. And there was something almost like wonder in its ancient voice. Souls that burned so brightly, so powerfully, that they would overwhelm any ordinary dragon that tried to bond with them. Souls that could contain the essence of an elder dragon without being destroyed. Danny shook his head, refusing to believe it, because he was nobody. He was nothing. He was a maintenance worker who had been rejected by every dragon on the planet. "You were not rejected because you were too weak," Obsidian said. "You were passed over because you were too strong. Because the dragons sensed what you truly are and were terrified of it." "That cannot be true," Danny said. But even as he spoke the words, he felt something stir in his chest. Something that had been sleeping his entire life. Something vast and powerful and hungry to be free. "Let me show you," Obsidian whispered. The dragon guided Danny to stretch out his hand toward the mine wall, to focus on the warmth spreading from the necklace through his body, to imagine that warmth concentrated into a single point at the center of his palm. Danny did as he was told, and for a moment nothing happened, and he felt like a fool for believing any of this could be real. Then the wall exploded. A section of solid rock 20 feet wide simply vanished, vaporized into dust and light by an energy that had come from somewhere deep inside Danny's own soul. And he fell backward in shock as the tunnel filled with smoke and debris. "That," Obsidian said, satisfaction rumbling through its voice, "is what they feared. That is what you truly are. That is the power that has been sleeping inside you since the day you were born." Danny stared at his own hand as if he had never seen it before, his entire body trembling with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. "How is this possible?" He breathed. Obsidian began to explain, telling Danny about the architects, an ancient cosmic species that had seeded life throughout the universe billions of years ago, and how humans had been designed as living conduits for universal energy, vessels capable of channeling power that could reshape reality itself. Most humans never discovered this potential, never unlocked the door that kept their true abilities hidden. But occasionally, one was born with the lock already broken. And these rare individuals were capable of things that most species could only dream of. Danny was one of these people. And now, with Obsidian's guidance, he could become something the galaxy had never seen before. "Will you teach me?" Danny asked, and the determination in his voice surprised even himself. "I have waited 3,000 years for someone worthy," Obsidian replied. "Yes, young one, I will teach you everything from that night forward." Danny trained in secret, learning to control the immense power that had always lived within him. And though the path was difficult and painful and filled with setbacks, he could feel himself becoming something more with every passing day. The boy who had been called Hollow was discovering that he had never been empty at all. He had simply been waiting to be filled. 6 months had passed since Danny first heard Obsidian's voice in the mines. And in that time, he had become something entirely different from the broken boy who had knelt alone on the arena platform every night after his shifts ended. Danny descended into the deepest tunnels where no one else dared to go. And there in the absolute darkness, he trained with the Elder Dragon, learning to channel the vast power that flowed through his soul like an endless river of fire and starlight. At first he could barely manage to create a spark without exhausting himself completely. But Obsidian was a patient teacher despite its harsh methods. And slowly Danny learned to control the energy rather than being controlled by it. Discovered that he could move objects with his thoughts, that he could sense the presence of living things for miles in every direction, that he could heal wounds on his own body by simply willing his flesh to knit back together. These were only the beginning. Obsidian told him, mere parlor tricks compared to what he would eventually be capable of. And Danny worked harder than he had ever worked in his life, because for the first time he had a purpose that was truly his. Oh, but their training was interrupted by catastrophes. The alarm sirens began screaming at 3 in the morning, pulling Danny from his bunk in the workers' dormitory. And he stumbled outside to see something that made his blood run cold. The sky was filled with ships, hundreds of massive black vessels that seemed to drink in the light of the stars. And they were descending toward the colony with a terrible, purposeful silence that spoke of conquest and death. "What are they?" Danny whispered, his hand pressing against the necklace beneath his shirt. "Void harvesters," Obsidian replied. And for the first time since Danny had known the Elder Dragon, he heard something like fear in its voice. "I had hoped they were only legend, but it seems some nightmares are real." The colony's defenses activated within minutes. Energy shields flickering to life and weapon platforms emerging from underground bunkers. And the Dragon Riders launched into the sky to meet the invaders with fire and fury. Danny watched from the ground as Katie and Zephyros soared upward alongside hundreds of other bonded pairs, their dragons breathing flames that should have melted steel, their riders wielding the elemental powers that the bond granted them, but the harvester ships did not burn. Instead, they opened ports along their hulls and released a wave of dark energy that washed across the battlefield like a plague. And wherever it touched a bonded pair, something terrible happened. Danny saw the connections between human and dragons simply snap, the glowing threads of soul energy that tied them together dissolving into nothing. And without their bonds, the dragons fell from the sky like stones, while their riders screamed in agony. Within hours the battle was over, and the harvesters had won. They landed their troops in the colony center, creatures that looked like living shadows with too many limbs and eyes that glowed with hungry light. And they began to herd the captured humans and dragons into massive holding pens. Danny watched from the shadows as his father was dragged away, as Katie was thrown into a pen with the other unbonded riders. As Cole Hartwell tried to fight back and was beaten until he stopped moving, the Harvester soldiers walked past Danny several times, their sensor devices sweeping over him. But they never stopped, never even looked at him. As if he were invisible. They cannot sense you, Obsidian explained. To their technology, you register as hollow, unbonded, worthless. A human with no resonance worth harvesting. What do they want? Danny asked, his fists clenched so tight that his nails drew blood from his palms. They harvest the energy created by the bond between human and dragon. Obsidian said, your species produces something when you connect with dragonkind. A form of power that can fuel their ships and their weapons and their terrible appetites for centuries. Danny felt sick as he realized what that meant. That every person he loved was going to be drained of their life force like fuel from a tank. That his father and Katie and everyone else would die screaming so that these monsters could power their empire. I have to stop them. Danny said, you are not ready, Obsidian replied. The full bonding between us has not been completed. And if you face them now with only partial power, you will die and accomplish nothing. Danny turned away from the holding pens and ran toward the mines, toward the place where he had first heard Obsidian's voice. And the Elder Dragon did not try to stop him because they both knew there was no other choice in the deepest chamber, surrounded by rock that had not seen light for 1,000,000 years. Danny pressed the necklace against his chest and spoke the words of true bonding that Obsidian had taught him. I offer my soul as your vessel, Danny said. I offer my body as your home. I offer my life as your anchor in this world, now and forever, until the stars themselves grow cold. The pain began immediately. It felt like being burned alive from the inside out. Like every cell in his body was being torn apart and rebuilt at the same time. And Danny screamed so loud that the very stones around him cracked and shattered. Obsidian's essence poured into him like a tsunami of black fire. An elder dragon's worth of power forcing itself into a human frame that was never designed to contain such magnitude. And Danny felt himself being destroyed and remade in the same terrible moment, but he did not let go. He held on to himself, to his memories, to the love he felt for his family and his friends, and even for the world that had rejected him. And he used that love as an anchor to keep from being swept away entirely. The agony lasted for hours, or maybe days, or maybe only seconds. Danny could not tell anymore, because time itself seemed to bend around him like light around a black hole. When it finally ended, Danny opened his eyes and found that he could see in the darkness as clearly as if the sun were shining. And when he raised his hands, he saw that they were wreathed in flames of pure shadow that gave off no heat, but seemed to pull at the very fabric of reality. Wings unfurled from his back. Not flesh and bone like a dragon's wings, but something made of darkness and starlight woven together. Something that existed partly in this dimension and partly somewhere else entirely. He rose to his feet and felt the power thrumming through every fiber of his being. More power than he had ever imagined possible. More power than any creature in this galaxy had wielded in 1,000 years. We are one now, Obsidian said. And this time, the voice came from inside Danny's own mind, from a presence that would be with him forever. We are something that has never existed before. Neither human nor dragon, but something new. Something more. Danny looked toward the surface, toward the invaders who were harvesting his people. And he smiled a smile that had no warmth in it at all. Let us show them what they have awakened, Danny said. And he began to rise through the rock itself, passing through solid matter like a ghost. Ascending toward the light and the battle that awaited him, the Unchosen boy was gone forever. In his place was something that would make the galaxy tremble. Danny erupted from the ground like a dark comet, leaving a crater 100 feet wide where the mine entrance had been. And for a moment, The entire colony fell silent as every eye turned to look at the impossible thing that had risen from the depths of the earth. He hung in the air without effort, his wings of shadow and starlight spreading wide enough to cast a darkness across the burning streets below. And his eyes burned with black fire that seemed to see through everything they touched. The Harvester soldiers reacted immediately, raising their weapons and firing streams of that same dark energy they had used to break the bonds between human and dragon. But the beams passed through Danny as if he were made of smoke, as if he existed in a place their weapons could not reach. Danny looked down at the invaders with an expression that held no fear and no mercy, only a cold and terrible purpose that made even the shadow creatures hesitate in their advance. "I was unwanted," Danny said, and his voice carried across the entire planet, resonating through the air and the ground and the minds of every living thing on Vareth Prime. "I was unchosen. You all looked at me and saw nothing." He raised one hand toward the nearest Harvester warship that hung in the sky above the colony, a vessel the size of a mountain that bristled with weapons capable of destroying cities. "Let me show you what nothing can do." Danny said. The ship crumpled. There was no explosion, no fire, no dramatic destruction. The massive vessel simply folded in on itself as if crushed by an invisible fist, collapsing smaller and smaller until it became a point of absolute darkness that swallowed itself and vanished from existence entirely. The bay, other Harvester ships immediately began to flee, their engines roaring as they tried to escape the atmosphere. But Danny moved between the stars themselves, appearing in front of each vessel before it could jump to safety. One by one, he unmade them, tearing apart the dark matter that held their hulls together, shredding their engines with thoughts as sharp as blades. And the sky above Vareth Prime filled with the wreckage of what had been an unstoppable invasion fleet. The shadow soldiers on the ground tried to fight back, tried to use their hostages as shields. But Danny reached out with his mind and gently lifted every human and dragon from the holding pens, carrying them through the air to safety as softly as a mother lifting her sleeping child. Then he turned his attention to the soldiers themselves. They died quickly, dissolved into the void from which they had come, their screams echoing for just a moment before silence returned to the streets of the colony. Only one ship remained, the largest of the Harvester vessels, the flagship of their fleet, and it hung in orbit above the planet with its weapons powered down in what Danny somehow knew was a gesture of surrender. "Come," a voice called from the ship, transmitted on all frequencies. "Speak with me, mighty one. Let us discuss terms." Danny flew upward through the atmosphere, passing through the cold vacuum of space as easily as he had walked through the streets of his home. And he entered the flagship through its hull without bothering to find a door. The interior of the ship was a nightmare of organic technology and stolen souls. Corridors that pulsed like veins, walls that whispered with the trapped consciousness of a million harvested beings. And at the heart of it all sat the Harvester Admiral. It was a creature of crystalline flesh that shifted and reformed constantly, a being that had consumed so many lives that it had become something beyond description. And it looked at Danny with eyes that held nothing but cold calculation. "You are remarkable," the Admiral said, its voice like breaking glass. "We have harvested across 10,000 galaxies for 1,000,000 years, and we have never encountered anything like you." Danny said nothing, simply waited, his power coiled inside him like a serpent ready to strike. "You're kind," the Admiral continued. "The ones like you with unlocked potential. You are the most valuable resource in all of creation. The architects scattered you across the cosmos like seeds, and we have spent eternity hunting you down." "Why?" Danny asked. "Because you are conduits," the Admiral explained, leaning forward with obvious hunger in its crystalline eyes. "You can channel energy that we can only harvest, energy that could fuel our empire forever, energy that could make us gods." The Admiral spread its many limbs in what might have been a gesture of welcome. "Join us," it said. "We will give you dominion over 1,000 worlds. We will make you a prince of our empire. And together we will harvest the stars themselves." Danny considered the offer for exactly one heartbeat. "You came to my world," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying a weight that made the very walls of the ship tremble. "You took my people. You broke the bonds between human and dragon. You were going to drain them until nothing remained but empty husks." He stepped closer to the Admiral, and the crystalline creature shrank back despite itself. "I am not a resource to be harvested," Danny continued. "I am not a weapon to be wielded. I am not a prince to be bought with promises of power." He reached out and placed one hand on the Admiral's chest, and the creature screamed as it felt Danny's touch begin to unravel the very essence of what it was. "I am human," Danny said, "and you will not take anyone else ever again." He reached into the fabric of reality itself, into the dimensional anchors that allowed the harvester fleet to exist in normal space, and he tore them free with a thought. The Admiral and every remaining harvester in the system were cast into the void between universes, exiled to an endless nothing where there was no light and no sound and no hope of return. A prison from which not even their dark gods could save them. Then Danny turned his attention to the harvesting ships where the remaining colonists were still being held. Vessels that had been in the process of jumping to safety before he had destroyed their fleet. He dismantled them carefully, gently, using his power with the precision of a surgeon. And he lowered every prisoner to the surface of Vareth Prime as softly as snowflakes falling on a winter morning. His father Marcus looked up at him from the ground, at the being his son had become, and Danny saw no pity in those eyes anymore. No shame, no disappointment, only awe, only pride. Only love. Katie stood beside her dragon Zephyros, the bond between them restored now that the harvester's disruption field had been destroyed. And she stared at Danny with tears streaming down her face. "Danny," she whispered, "is it really you?" But Danny could feel something wrong inside himself, something breaking. And when he looked at his hands, he saw that they were becoming transparent, his human flesh dissolving into pure energy one cell at a time. "The power is too much," Obsidian said inside his mind. And for the first time, the elder dragon sounded truly sad. "Your body cannot contain what we have become. You have perhaps hours before you are consumed entirely." Danny nodded, accepting this truth as he had accepted everything else that had happened to him. And he looked down at the people he had saved, at the world he had protected, at the family and friends who would live because of what he had done. It was enough. He decided it was more than enough. Danny flew toward the mountains where the dragons made their homes, his body growing more transparent with every passing moment. And below him, the people of Vareth Prime watched in silence as the being who had saved them all drifted across the sky like a fading star. The great dragons came out of their caves as he approached, creatures who had ignored him on the day of the bonding ceremony, beasts who had walked past him as if he were invisible and unworthy of their attention. Now they bowed their massive heads as he passed, pressing their snouts to the ground in a gesture of respect that had not been offered to any being in 3,000 years. Since the time when the elder dragons had still walked among them, Danny landed on the highest peak, the sacred mountain where legend said the first dragon had been born at the dawn of the world. And he sat down on the cold stone and watched the sun begin to rise over the horizon. His father had followed him somehow, climbing the treacherous path with a determination that Danny remembered from his childhood. And Marcus emerged onto the peak, just as the first rays of golden light touched Danny's dissolving form. "Son," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "Danny, please. There has to be something we can do." Danny smiled, and it was a real smile this time, warm and genuine, and filled with a peace that he had never known in his human life. "Father," he said, "I am not dying. I am becoming something else. Something that will protect this world long after my human body is gone. Marcus fell to his knees beside his son, tears streaming down his weathered face. And Danny reached out to touch his father's cheek with fingers that were already turning to light. I am sorry, Marcus whispered. I am so sorry for how I looked at you after the ceremony. I am sorry for the shame I felt. I am sorry for not believing in you when you needed me most. You have nothing to be sorry for, Danny replied. You taught me to be strong. You taught me to never give up. You taught me that protecting the people you love is the most important thing in the world. He looked out at the colony below, at the thousands of people who were emerging from their homes to watch his transformation, at his mother and sister who were being held back by the crowd because they could not reach the mountain in time. I'm going to protect them forever now, Danny said. I am going to become something that will watch over this world until the stars themselves grow cold. Obsidian stirred inside his mind. The elder dragon's presence, warm and comforting as it had been since they first bonded. There is another option, Obsidian said. You could fight this. You could try to hold on to your physical form. But you would be diminished. You would lose most of what we have become. And you would eventually die anyway, as all mortal things must. Or, Danny asked, or you can embrace the transformation, Obsidian replied. You can release your hold on flesh and bone and become pure energy. A guardian spirit bound to this world itself. Something that will endure as long as Vareth Prime endures. Danny thought about what that meant. Never again feeling his mother's embrace. Never again tasting his favorite foods. Never again experiencing all the small pleasures of human life that he had taken for granted. But then he thought about the children who would stand in future bonding ceremonies, hoping and fearing just as he had hoped and feared. And he thought about how many of them might be passed over because their souls burned too brightly for ordinary dragons. He made his choice. I want you to promise me something, Danny said to his father. I want you to change the ceremony. I want you to make sure that no child is ever called hollow or unworthy again. Marcus nodded, tears still falling. I swear it. And tell Katie that I am sorry I pushed her away, Danny continued. Tell her that her friendship meant everything to me. Even when I was too hurt to show it, I will tell her. Marcus promised. Danny rose to his feet and spread his wings one final time. Wings that were now made entirely of light, and he looked up at the sky where the stars were still visible despite the rising sun. I am not afraid, he said. And it was the truth. He let go. The transformation happened slowly at first, his feet dissolving into streams of golden light that rose up toward the heavens. Then his legs and his torso and his arms. And finally his face, the last thing to disappear being his smile and his eyes that had burned with black fire but now shone with the pure white radiance of a newborn star. The light rose into the sky and spread across the dome of the heavens, forming a pattern that had never existed before. A constellation in the shape of a dragon with human eyes that looked down on Vareth Prime with eternal vigilance. A warmth washed over the planet, a feeling of safety and protection that sank into the very soil and stone. And every person on Vareth Prime felt it, a presence that would watch over them forever. Danny was gone, but he was also everywhere in the weeks and months that followed. The colony rebuilt itself from the destruction the harvesters had caused, and the story of what Danny had done spread across every settlement and outpost on the planet. The bonding ceremony was changed, just as Danny had asked, and never again was any child declared hollow or unworthy, because the dragons had learned from Obsidian's presence that some souls simply burned too bright for ordinary bonds. And these souls were honored rather than rejected. Katie became one of the greatest dragon riders in history, and she often flew up to the highest peaks to speak to the constellation that had once been her friend, telling Danny about her life and her adventures and always thanking him for saving her when all seemed lost. Marcus led the effort to prepare for future invasions, knowing that the harvesters were not the only threat in the cosmos. And he made sure that humanity would never be caught unprepared again. The word spread beyond Vareth Prime, carried by traders and travelers to every corner of the galaxy. The story of the human boy who had bonded with an elder dragon and defeated an empire with nothing but the power of his own. So other species heard the story and wondered, and feared, and changed the way they thought about the small soft creatures called humans, who seemed so weak and so insignificant. The harvesters never returned, and other predatory species changed their courses when they heard the name of the world, protected by the Unchosen Guardian. And on quiet nights, when the twin moons rose and the stars shone brightest, the people of Vareth Prime would look up at Danny's constellation and tell their children the story of the boy who had been unwanted and unchosen until his necklace whispered the truth. They told of how humanity's greatest strength was not power or technology or numbers, but the courage to protect others, even at the cost of everything. The willingness to sacrifice for love. The stubborn refusal to accept defeat, even when all hope seemed lost. Children would listen with wide eyes and then look up at the stars and wave, believing that the Guardian was waiting back. And perhaps he was, because Danny Mercer was still there, still watching, still protecting, and he would remain there until the end of time itself. Proof that humanity was not prey and not fuel and not a resource to be harvested. Humanity was the species that turned rejection into revolution and pain into power and unwanted outcasts into gods, and the galaxy would never forget it.